The next thing I want to talk about are custom macros. Now, those of you who are familiar with Comosys will already know that we already have this feature called user-defined macros. But user-defined macros, as you know, have a limitation, and that is that once you define a macro, it only works in situations where the main member and the secondary member and the orientation and the approach angles are exactly the same as the source definition. If they're different, then the user-defined macro will not work, or it will work, but it will not produce the results according to the situation. With this version of Comosys, we are introducing what we call custom macros. And with these, you will get a new ability where you will be able to define your own macros, and not only define them in a dead way, but you will be able to give them intelligence, which means that they will adapt whenever the main and the secondary profiles or their orientations or their approach angles change. Now, the first step is to use the custom macro wizard, which gives you several options, like you can create a connection or a detail or an end detail, like a base plate, for example, or a seam, or even a custom part, which is standing alone in space. Once you're done with that, you can give it a name and you can give it a location where it will appear in the component manager. Once you've done that, the next step is to simply add the parts which have been created by the macro to the definition. And after doing that, what you will do is you will then add the dependents. So the main column and the secondary beam, for example. And in the final stage, what you will do is you will take a snapshot, which you will then use as the icon of the component which you are developing. Once the definition is done, what we do is we continue to the custom macro browser, and this is where you get a summary of all the main parts and the parts which have been created by the macro. Now, if you were to open up this tree view, we will see that we have all the details of the main parts. At the top, we have things like the material and your drawing groups and your class and your color and your part prefixes. And you also, in the bottom part, which is the part properties, you have things like your position in depths, position in planes, rotation offsets, section parameters. Using this custom browser, you will not only be able to get these properties of the main dependents, but also set their values depending on the parameters entered. And then similarly, you have complete access to the created parts, which means the plates, the bolts, the welds, the cuts, and you have access to their individual properties like the general properties and part properties and chamfer properties, etc. Once again, you will be able to get these values and you will be able to set them depending on whatever the needs of the user are. So you will be able to set all the properties of the created parts. Now let's move on to the most important concept of bindings. With bindings, you can now associate the handles of your created parts to either the dependent parts or the created parts themselves, which means that the handles can move when the planes of these parts move. As an example, let's bind the 8 handles of this fin plate to the web of the secondary beam coming in, and see that how when the secondary beam moves, the fin plate will move with it. As you can see, despite the fact that the macro was defined with the secondary coming at a 90-degree angle to the main, now that we move it to an inclined position, the fin plate adjusts very nicely. Now, of course, these handles do not have to be glued to the planes with a zero distance. In fact, what you can do is you can control the distances by using variables inside the macro, as you can see on the screen. As you can see, when we move the secondary beam down a bit, the entire fin plate adjusts accordingly, while also maintaining the distances from the bottom and top flanges of the secondary beam. Now, while bindings are very useful, they truly come to life with variables. And with variables, you can do so much more. There are three types of variables: custom variables, binding variables, and also object variables. And by using the custom variables, you can really control how the bindings will behave and how the objects will behave. Now, the custom variables, which are over here, for example, can be defined by either using formulas, which can include other custom variables. So, for example, you could write bolt y dist plus shift, something like that, including the other variables. Or you could just call some functions which are available inside the custom component, custom macro editor. So by using functions or formulas including other variables as well as functions, you can basically do anything you want. So if you're wondering what kind of things can be done with this new capability, here is a base plate with many plates in it, and with using the custom variables, we can access the properties of these plates, move them around, give offsets, as you can see on the screen. Very conveniently, we can make a very useful macro out of it within an hour or two. The bindings have been created, the object variables are accessible through the form, and everything moves together with the dependents. Perhaps you're interested in a much more difficult example. Once again, the bindings are extremely easy, and also adding the custom variables. And these custom variables then allow us to change the plate thicknesses, the interbolt distances, the edge distances, other edge variables. And if you want, we can change the size of the column or relocate the beam to a skewed position. Once again, everything works. Now, let's try an angle pleat connection. But instead of using angles, let's use folded plates, because with folded plates, we don't have the connection available in the standard library. Once again, as you can see, you can move, you can enter the parameters, the bolts, the edge distances, everything changes beautifully. And if you move the end point of the beam, once again, the skewed connection is also made in front of you. Now let's do an example in which the number of created elements actually changes according to the lengths. So let's change the width of the lower landing, the upper landing, the length of the stair, the height of the stair, and then the width of the staircase. And you can see everything is adjusting perfectly. Now let's do an example about getting data from text files. So this is a very simple example in which there's a column and there's some threads coming out of it. And you can change the main column profile. For example, you can choose a different one, press apply, and it's going to be a different profile. But the point over here is this ladder name, which depends on a file. So there are three types of ladders inside it. Now, if we go to the text file, you see it uses a text file called ladder types. And if I open that file, it's got three ladders inside, and the column height and the number of threads is given over there. So using this file, if I just choose the type of ladder to be 1, and I say apply, a different ladder is created with a height of 5 meters and 5 threads. If I choose ladder 2, I can increase the height and put more threads on that. So a very simple example just gives you an idea that you can use data read from files directly through these macros. And as you might have noticed, the dialog box for these custom macros is completely customizable as well. You can access it from the custom macro browser just by pressing the form editor. And when you do that, the complete editor for the dialog box appears in front of you. And here you have access to adding new tabs, deleting new tabs, adding weld variables, bolt variables. For example, this bolt tab, this entire set of bolt parameters can be added by just pressing a button. Similarly, for the plate tabs, automatically you can get these variables assigned, or you can do them manually as well. You can add pictures, color boxes, basically anything you want, edit boxes, labels, completely customizable, very easy to use. Just save it away and it'll give you a very nice dialog box to play with. Just imagine the power this gives you. A particular unique connection is not available off the shelf, just create it.
in a matter of hours, and not just a dummy connection, but an intelligent one. Save it away for future use in your company and in other projects. Isn't that wonderful? It's basically parametric modeling at your fingertips. And we're now adding some very special capabilities to this parametric modeling engine. When you use it, you'll be pleasantly surprised at how little you will need to do. It'll just work magically. So stay tuned for even more on this in the coming months. It's going to leave the competition in the dust.